Siblings and sisters and brothers, welcome to Thursdays for the Soul. This is a weekly webinar series to care for the whole church, and our topics are wide-ranging and focused on the spirituality and care of people. There is prayer, worship, psalm readings, and compassionate teachings all included. And today I am deeply humbled to be in the room with such wisdom. To introduce our esteemed moderator and speakers is the Associate General Minister, Reverend Tracy Blackman.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction. I'm going to introduce the gracious moderator we have today, and she will introduce the rest of the panel. For nearly 50 years, the Reverend Yvonne Delk has been a strong ally in the fight for human and civil rights for people of color, children, and the poor. She has served as teacher, educator, preacher, executive, organizer, and author in the United States and in the wider global community. Reverend Dr. Delk grew up in the Southern Conference of the UCC and was ordained in 1974 at Fellowship United Church of Christ in Chesapeake, Virginia, becoming the first African-American woman to be ordained as clergy in our denomination. Dr. Delk was the first African-American woman to head a national instrumentality in the UCC, the Office of Church and Society. She is also the former executive of the Community Renewal Society of Chicago and served as moderator of the program to combat racism of the World Council of Churches. Not one to ever stop, Dr. Delk currently serves on the Historical Council of the United Church of Christ and the Board of Trustees at the beloved Franklinton Center at Bricks. Dr. Delk is the founding director of the Center for African American Theological Studies, and she is a daughter of the Afro-Christian stream of the United Church of Christ. I am honored, and I know that we will all be enlightened that Dr. Delk is here to moderate our webinar today.
Well, thank you, Tracy, that I consider a daughter in the ministry. And to all of you who have signed up for this webinar, our team that will be presenting today is so pleased that you have thought that this is important for you. And it's definitely important for me. The Afro-Christian preservation history is my history. It is about the church that I grew up in. It is about the tradition that shaped me and equipped me for ministry within the United Church of Christ. And yet, this important stream is, I think, a fifth stream that doesn't always get recognized within the United Church of Christ. It is an invisible stream. If you were to ask me right up until the time I was 15 years of age, I'm now 82, when I was 15 years old, what denomination I was a part of, I would have told you I was a part of an African-American denomination called the Convention of the South and the Afro Christians. I had no idea that I was a part of a predominantly white denomination. And that's because the Afro-Christian heritage of which I was a part was definitely separate from much that was happening at that time in the Christian Church of the United Church of Christ. But much is changing. And we are now at a point that it is important for us to tell that story, the story of the Afro-Christians within the United Church of Christ. And there's a team of us that's working to preserve and document that story. Not only for those of us who continue to be a part of its history, but for the United Church of Christ as well. And so our presentation today will be one of a team and not just one person. It is well known that the United Church of Christ's unity model and story involve the coming together of four streams, distinct bodies. And in any polity course, you will hear about the Congregational stream from England, the Evangelical and Reformed streams from Germany and Switzerland, and a faith stream indigenous to the new experiment in democracy in the United States, the Christians. However, within the Christian stream was a fifth faith body. The Afro-Christians, they were separate. We were separate and independent. Unlike the white sisters and brothers, they were not indigenous to this new land. They were brought to this new land as a part of this nation's original sin, that of slavery, a sin that was embraced by many of the early mothers and fathers of the Christian church. And while James O'Kelly, one of the white founders of the Christian denomination, opposed the system of slavery, the white Southern Christian Convention did not. It did not embrace the Afro-Christians as equals. Rather, they saw them as objects of mission, as opposed to subjects of mission. And sadly to say, it's a commentary in a lens that continued into the formation of the United Church of Christ. On that day, on June 25th, 1957, when the mothers and fathers processed from Cleveland's public square to Music Hall to constitute the new union, it was a union envisioned by whites, produced by whites, to proclaim the good news of the gospel of unity of four distinct faith communities coming together with a vision of unity for all of humankind. The fault line existed from its very beginning. This was a predominantly Euro-centered unity model. Absent in any significant way was the presence of its Afro-Christian stream. The Afro-Christian were envisioned primarily as objects of its mission, as opposed to subjects with insights and understandings to contribute to the United Church of Christ's identity, its affirmation, its vision, and its missions. So the dialogue that we are beginning here has to simply be a beginning step. As the United Church of Christ takes time now to seriously examine its role in racism and white privilege and white power. If our denomination is to truly be open to the movement of the Holy Spirit at this particular time in the history of our nation, it has to take the time for truth-telling and truth-facing. It's not sufficient to see the Afro-Christian story as a hidden history or as a footnote. It has to be a headlight, empowering the United Church of Christ to live out its identity and its mission in new ways. The Afro-Christian story is about a people of faith who emerged up out of a dehumanizing system of chattel slavery in 1867. It left the balconies of the white churches. It left the church houses of those who held them in captivity. It left the theology of those who held them in captivity. And it interpreted and appropriated even the cardinal principles of the Christian church, as well as the principles of the Christian gospel. It articulated it from its relevance to our freedom struggle, believing in a God who works for liberation from every bondage. So the Afro-Christian connection must be seen in its own name and in its own definition. It was separate and independent from the white Southern Convention. The story is not about objects of mission. It's about a sacred journey of faith, a people rising with faith, with dignity, with courage, giving its members meaning and value as members of the household of God and the household of faith. There are many marks of the Afro-Christians. Let me just share 5 of them and then open it up for my sisters and brothers to kind of illuminate on these. First, this was a unique and distinct stream of consciousness because of its African identity. These were African men and women of God. The God to whom they gave allegiance was the God of the ancestors, who was not made known to them in slavery, but on the motherland of Africa. The God of our African ancestors was a constant connection to all of life, moving through time and space, connecting the living and the dead and the yet to be born. The God of the Afro-Christians was in all, through all, bearing them up on every leaning side. God was the power and presence of the Spirit, calling life out of death, bringing forth order out of chaos, and all of life was sacred from the womb to the tomb. Second, the relationship of the Afro-Christians to the divine was never simply a matter of the mind alone. It was mind, body, and spirit. And the Spirit of God was alive in the Afro-Christian worship on Sunday morning. It was in our preaching. It was in our singing. It was in our shouting. It was in our praise to the Almighty God who had come to us in the motherland of Africa. Third, the African Christians were strategically organized as a faith entity, as a center of faith, transformation, equipping its members with meaning and value as members of the household of God. The Afro Christian Convention in its early formation was composed of 150 churches, 25,000 members, 185 ordained ministers and licentiates, 150 Sunday schools, located primarily, not exclusively, but primarily in North Carolina and Virginia. And the Afro Christian Convention created the Franklinton Literary and Theological Institute, later called Franklinton Christian College, which existed in Franklinton, North Carolina from 1871 to 1930. It embodied a women's national and home foreign convention, as well as a Christian publishing convention. Fourth mark, the Afro-Christians were deeply rooted in the centrality of Christ and the Bible, with intentional structures and ministries that it created for the training of pastors, adults, and youth, the calling of ordained ministers, the creation of a women's fellowship, a layman's fellowship, a youth fellowship, the development of leaders for church and society, grounded in our African understanding of community and Ubuntu. The Afro-Christians were mission-minded in the planting of churches and missions in British Guiana and Trinidad and Barbados and British West Indies, and it had missionaries to Liberia. So as we begin this dialogue, the story of Afro-Christians is not about the past. It's about the present and the future. As we stop to examine at this moment in the history of our nation and this moment in the history of the United Church of Christ, we have got to ask ourselves, who are we in ways that we are not free to walk away from? As we stop to examine who we are, we can learn much from this stream about faith, about spirit, about community, about justice, about freedom and liberation. And as we pause at this moment of our history in the United Church of Christ, at this intersection of our life and mission, it's important that we do not recreate the fault line of 1957. This fifth stream must be visible, an important component of our commitment to a unity model that is not simply Euro-centered. The Afro-Christian legacy continues. It continues in the Southern Conference. The Afro-Christian churches make up the majority of the African American churches, not membership, but churches in the United Church of Christ. And the Afro-Christian legacy continues in the history and mission of Franklinton Center at Brits. These are powerful subjects, not objects of mission. So what is the legacy that we bring to the United Church of Christ at this moment? What is the contribution that we can contribute as it continues to face racism, not only in the world which surrounds us, but as we look at the meaning of what it means to truly be an inclusive church in this moment of our history. And so I have asked the team that is working to document and lift up this model of unity, this model of spirit, this model of faith for the whole denomination, to comment in the amount of time that we can have at the beginning of this conversation. We can't say it all or do it all at this moment, but to begin that conversation. And so I'm going to ask first that Reverend K. Ray Hill will speak to us about the instruments that exist at the local level, the Afro-Christian churches that now exist within primarily the Southern Conference of the United Church of Christ. We are the embodiment of that tradition. We are the embodiment of that faith. And we are the embodiment of that vision as we look at what it means for us not to be objects within the United Church of Christ, but subjects, offering instruments, offering understandings and insights. So I call first of all on Reverend K. Rayfield to say a word representing the UCC Afro-Christian Church. Reverend K. Ray.
Yes, one of the things that's become looking at the churches that are still very active in the life of the United Church of Christ today, we have over 60 churches that are rooted and grounded in the Southern Conference that are still living the legacy that is part of the Afro-Christian tradition. It brings with it that tradition of being community-oriented, spirit-based, and moving for unity. It continues the legacy that started from slavery all the way through. And somehow or another, people still wonder, why do you keep looking back at where you came from? Because some of the issues that they were facing then, we are still facing now. One of the challenges that they faced then, many of them did not know how to read, did not know how to do a lot of things in terms of community living together. And therefore, the Afro-Christian Convention gave them education. One of the comments that was made in 1884 was that many of the people who were free couldn't even read the Bible at that time. And that's how we got to the place of Franklinton Center and an educational institution to educate our own folk, because we needed to be educated. I go historically because we are still in a place now that people still don't know how to embrace all that's going on in the culture today. We still need the Afro-Christian tradition to continue to help us find our own identity in the midst of an oppressive culture and context. We still need a place where we can go be ourselves, worship God in our own way, and still understand that God will see us through everything. Even in light of what has happened from a social justice standpoint, we still need a place where we can stand up and declare that God still will make a way out of no way. And because of that rich tradition, when we come up against the oppression of society, we still gather, still as a body of believers who said, God will see us through this. It's our faith that we are doing in the local church today that still allows us to continue to press forward, even when we are pressed down. They brought us out of balconies and gave us opportunity to experience God in our own way. And I find that we still need to do that today. Even when the majority culture continues to invite us to tables, they still want us to be quiet and not be all that we can be in many of these settings. So the church setting today still is relevant, still important for people who many times don't feel like they have a voice. So we are still taking the faith that we believe in a God that empowers us when the world says we have no power. We still believe in a God who continues to help us make ways out of no way when everything else pushes against us and says that we can't. And because of that legacy and because of our commitment to continue to move forward, no matter what obstacles are put in our way, we continue to develop. We continue to raise up another generation of young people who will now continue to believe in a God who will see them through all the changes that society is now doing. These churches today, many of them are very actively trying to make sure that the identity of being a part of a majority cultural church, that their voice is still heard and that they can still have a faith in a God, even if we worship somewhat differently. It's because in our faith and in our worship, we believe that the Spirit is alive and well. We bring that to all that we do. We give it all that we have. We are guided by it, and we are empowered by it, that no matter what happens, we still say tomorrow will be brighter than today. No matter how many of us are killed on the streets in this country by multiple situations, we still believe that God is still a God who will see us through. And that faith allows us to continue to interact and be involved at the table with inside the UCC, to be able to say we still want to be a part. We still want to offer our gifts and skills. We still bring gifts to the table, and we have a voice that says, let's do what we can do to bring a community together, to bring people together, and to see God in a different way. Our understanding of what the Spirit is saying to us in this day and in this time declares to us that our voice needs to be heard, and that what we come to bring is an asset to the United Church of Christ. We come to allow ourselves to use our gifts for the upbuilding of what God is doing in this time and in this way. So I wanted just to reaffirm our commitment to be an active part of the United Church of Christ and allow the gifts and skills that we have to be reinforced as we bring our sense of community, our sense of faith, our sense of what the Spirit is saying to us, that we bring that every day to our worship experience, we bring it to our lives, and we take it to the marketplace where we represent God in our own way, declaring that God is using us to make a difference in the day-to-day activities in the life of not only the church, the marketplace, but in human dignity. And we are trying our very best to make sure that the legacy that we have been given is also passed on to a new generation that now needs it, it appears today, more than ever before.
Well, thank you, K-Ray. I think you have named a portion of it, and because I want to make sure I get the other components in as well, I want to move from Reverend K-Ray to Miss Vivian Lucas. Education was always a critical component of the life of the Afro-Christian tradition. Faith was, education was, community was, freedom and justice was, and the school and church were important to all of that. From the Afro-Christian school that was in Franklinton, North Carolina, and when we had to close it, and through the Convention of South moved to Franklinton Center at Bricks, we continued those themes of education, of liberation, of transformation, of community. So, and it lives now in the institution. The Afro-Christian tradition lives within Franklinton Center at Bricks. Vivian Lucas, Executive Director, would you say a word about the continuing legacy of that tradition now?
Welcome home. And welcome home is the greeting of the Franklinton Center at Bricks, because we truly believe that when you come to the Franklinton Center at Bricks, you're at home for many reasons. And my purpose now is to explain to you how Franklinton Center relates and the work that has happened and the work that's happening now. First of all, I have to say that Franklinton Center at Bricks is a historic liberation-seeking organization that has the roots that date back to the 1800s that Yvonne talked about. The mission of Franklinton Center at Bricks is to provide a nurturing home to local, national, and global programs and organizations that seek liberation. And it does that by promoting social transformation and empowering people through education and capacity building, community development, heritage preservation, and land-based innovation. And sometime in the future, I'd love to tell you more about that. But as I listen to Reverend K-Ray Hill talk about how we look back, that is a very important part of the African people from which we derive. The symbol Sankofa was adopted by the Franklinton Center board 2 years ago. It's the symbol of a mythical African bird looking back with an egg in his mouth, but flying forward. And that is what we are about. We are not forgetting, lest we forget what has already happened. We're not forgetting the good, and we're not going to forget the challenges. The vision for the center, based on the Afrocentric model, is that it embraces the memory and the contributions and the resilience of our ancestors. The vision includes realizing the whole divinity of a person. And the vision seeks to manifest a world where systemic racism does not exist. And our vision embodies the gifts of learning, outdoor play, teaching, health, safety, love, and connection to beloved community. Franklinton Center, at this point, as we connect with our legacy, we have 4 pillars that we're celebrating now that is a part of our Afro-Christian heritage. The 4 pillars are the following, and they do relate to our predecessor institutions of the Franklinton Christian College and the Brick Junior College. Number 1, the Center for Rural Community Development and Education. Number 2, Center for African American Historic Preservation. Number 3, the Center for Land-Based Innovation. We have 244 acres of property, and we see opportunities to move forward and to sustainably utilize that property. And number 4, the Social Justice Conference and Retreat Center that most people are really familiar with. Examples of how we work. We have been partnering with the United Church of Christ Justice and local church ministries for years, and the predecessor bodies of the United Church of Christ under that covenant ministry, as well as with the Council on Health and Human Services ministry. We have, during last year, for example, to demonstrate how the legacy of community and unity still is alive at the Franklinton Center at Bricks. During COVID-19 pandemic, we have served as a testing site. We've served as a COVID-19 vaccination site and continue to do so. We have served as a site, we do have to enroll individuals in the affordable healthcare plans, provided remote learning pods for local school systems, co-instructed a social justice course for high school students, implemented a first-time voter education program, provided campus-wide Wi-Fi access to families, students, and schools in the area. And it's hard to believe, but we have provided over 800,000 pounds, that's 400 tons of food to community families through partnerships and community garden and our school garden partnership, Department of Health and Human Services, and our orchard and our pantry. We are all especially proud to say that we, during COVID-19, launched our LGBTQ BIPOC program called Oasis in the Desert. We're located in rural Eastern North Carolina, and there are a lot of challenges that have persisted for many, many, many years. And one of the critical issues that we've identified is that there has not been a place who are LGBTQ to connect and strategize and build solidarity. So even as we talk about what we're doing now what we have been propelled to do, inspired to do, because of what our ancestors of the Afro-Christian tradition have seeded in us. I too am a daughter of the Southern Conference. I'm a daughter of the Afro-Christian Church. And so I am proud to be a part of the Franklinton Center at Bricks, where we are able to demonstrate with our feet on the ground the direct activity and manifestation of what it means to be the beloved community through our legacy of the Afro-Christian Church.
Oh, thank you, Vivian. And now I want to go to Reverend Brenda Square, who is the minister now of the Afro-Christian Preservation Project. And Brenda, tell us why we think it's so important at this point in our life and mission of the United Church of Christ to document and preserve this history. And why is it important for the life of the United Church of Christ, especially at this time in our nation when the divide is so great and when we are seeking to become a much more inclusive community of persons. Brenda Square, Minister of our Preservation Project.
Good afternoon, good afternoon. And it is indeed an honor to be with everyone this afternoon. We in the Afro-Christian Preservation Project are moving by the Spirit to recover, to remember, and to reconnect the sacred legacies which we need today to help us to know who we are, to help us understand where we are, and to help us to know and to move forward with greater awareness, greater spiritual empowerment, greater acknowledgement as the entire United Church of Christ family. There's a great legacy that we've not been able to understand and acknowledge and actually receive as our identity in the United Church of Christ. I am an archivist. I spent 20 years documenting UCC history in the archives at the Amistad Research Center. In that time, I came to see that the Afro-Christian legacy has been misidentified. It's not been properly labeled. We've not really understood what this legacy is in the United Church of Christ. So we at the Afro-Christian Legacy Project, out of a conversation in the United Church of Christ Historical Council, and in our January 2017 meeting of the Historical Council, we appointed a committee after we met at Franklinton Center. A committee was appointed to develop a plan to identify, document, and preserve the history and legacy of the Afro-Christian heritage of the United Church of Christ. The committee members must first identify these records. We will survey current institutions, various archival registry to identify existing records. We're working with scholars, BBZ, Dr. Barbara Brown-Zickman, Reverend Rick Taylor, who have all done extensive research and written about the history of the Christian church. But the Afro-Christian legacy is widely unknown, totally undocumented in archives and repositories as we write about the history of Africans in America. We must go back now because this rich legacy is in jeopardy of being lost. We're moving forward to first survey all of our existing congregations by building a registry, and they have been a part of a sacred center with a little project and signing up to be a part of it. And that we have a community of historic congregations that have gathered in this project who are working with us, providing us information on the history of their churches, the pastorals. We've collected initially a collection of church histories, pastor information, and we now have a team from various congregations who have signed up to help us to identify records. We are also looking for people in the UCC, in our communities, in our nation who have these stories. We will be rushing to collect oral histories, to collect the oral traditions, which is so much a part of this legacy. And then we are going to identify records that exist in Amistad Research Center, at Elon College, and the Congregational Library. All of these histories have been pulled together, and there's a great tradition in the archives of describing materials. So we have to go back and read these records to identify them as Afro-Christian. And this rich legacy is important for us. It's part of our DNA as a United Church of Christ. We need to understand who we are, how we got to this moment, these spiritual legacies. The Spirit is moving us, directing us to the collections, to the people who have the stories. We are collecting them in a
I think that the sound
officially organized Afro-Christian museum that has been established at Franklinton Center and making plans to be able to, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
We can hear you, Reverend Brenda. Your connection is a little weak, but go ahead. We need to hear what you're saying.
I think at this point,
you hear me?
Reverend, we are experiencing some lag with your transmission. Chris Davies is sending you a message on how to call in on your phone.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'm trying to summarize that. Actually, the archives has been organized. We've collected additional deposits from churches, and we are building a team to help us to compile
Mama Delk, if you would take over at this point.
All right, I will.
And we will.
Again, we are just so grateful for the work of the Historical Council of the United Church of Christ, who heard our concern about the fifth stream. We are very grateful to Barbara Brown Zigman, who in her earlier books reminded us of who this United Church of Christ is and began to uncover the hidden histories that are connected, inclusive histories that are connected to the life of the United Church of Christ. For the Afro-Christians living within the construct of the southern part of the United Church of Christ and living within the construct of a separate and distinctly unequal existence, it has been an important journey for us to find our place at the table. I would say even that when the Convention of the South came into existence in 1950, in preparation for this new denomination that was yet to be created, it wanted to come in strength. The Convention of the South was composed predominantly of Afro-Christian churches and Black congregational churches. The majority of the Convention of the South, however, were the Afro-Christian churches. And as it sat at its table, getting ready for this new moment and this new unity, it wanted to come in strength. It wanted to come with a strong sense that its identity and its presence would be fully embraced by this new denomination. And the Convention of the South initially wanted to stay together as a conference where we could, in fact, name the reality of our faith without having to, in fact, move through and to be connected to a predominantly white system that we would have to be held accountable to. What does it mean to be ordained? By whose rules and regulation? What does it mean for us to engage in mission by whose rules and regulation? And so within a predominantly white system, a predominantly white system of 4 streams of consciousness, here was this Afro-Christian combined in the Convention of the South that had to face a serious question of whether our life being integrated into the United Church of Christ would be worth the gains, whether our dividing, we were coming as a strong entity, the 5 conferences, a convention, 25,000 members, a strong entity. The United Church of Christ believing that this was the moment for integration could not see us holding together as an independent unit. But it was the intention of those early mothers and fathers to become and to remain an independent unit with power, with authority, with voice, with the ability to have our perspectives known and not dissected into this predominantly white consciousness. However, sitting with the other mothers and fathers at the table, our mothers and fathers made a decision that this new United Church of Christ, which really wanted to embody all of us throughout its parts and not have a separate part that was named by race, decided to, in fact, become inclusive and to integrate into the various conferences. So new lines were drawn, and the body that had held strong and the body that had been so effective in terms of ministering to the needs of African Americans in the Afro-Christian tradition made a decision to, in fact, integrate into the United Church of Christ system. And the question continues, what have we gained by that and what have we lost by that? Charlie Cobb once said this: the United Church of Christ has the proclivity to do right when pushed, but it has been a pushing enterprise in order for the traditions that have named us and have so effectively shaped us for mission to be really held in high affirmation. Too often, we are still seen not as subjects of mission, but objects of mission. And so the question for us today, as the United Church of Christ looks at racism and looks at white privilege, as it looks at white power within the construct of where it is and who it is to still ask the question, is it still really ready to receive a truly inclusive body, embracing not only the Afro-Christians, but our other sisters and brothers of color of faith in it, as we face this new moment in history? Well, let me say, we've laid out the parameters of our discussion, and we are open to hearing your talk back and reminding you now, this is a beginning discussion at a moment in the life of the United Church of Christ when Tracy Blackman has helped us to see we need to be doing some serious look at who we are and what it means for us to really be the United Church of Christ.
Thank you so much. And I know that you all haven't had a chance to follow the chat, but people are deeply grateful for this information and are amening that this cannot be the only conversation, especially as we make a public declaration that we are ready to tackle unfinished business inside the church and outside of the church. We have some questions for the panel, and I will place these questions before you. And then I have a question of my own that I want to ask, but I'll leave that for last in case we run out of time. The first question comes from Kent Salati. There are so many gifts received from the Afro-Christian Connection and its legacy and power that is so important and relevant today. The gift of belief that Jesus is the sovereign head of the church is one gift. What other gifts among the many would you name as crucial to our future in the United Church of Christ?
Well, I would begin let me say this, the 5 cardinal principles of the Christian church, that of which the Afro-Christians adapted some of its belief, had 5 cardinal principles. One was Jesus Christ is the only head of the church. The second was that the Bible is, in fact, a sufficient rule of thought for the denomination. The Afro-Christians embraced that. But it also embraced the whole notion of Christian character. Who you are and what you do has a lot to say about what it means for you to declare what it means to be Christian in the midst of the times in which we live. And so knowing that, in fact, the Afro-Christians were living within the construct of a system in which racism was still embodied, and in a system where Blacks were not seen as equal, had to call into question our behavior, our Christian witness, the meaning of our Christian witness to that which we believe. And it's at this point that the whole understanding of spirit. What is spirit within the construct of our faith understanding? The Black Afro-Christians were deeply rooted in spirit, the spirit of God that moves in us, transforming us, equipping us to be the people of God, breaking through those old assumptions that exist and enabling us to really be able to become the beloved community. And so I think spirit is an important part of the Afro-Christians understanding. Community is a very important part of its understanding of who it was, it is, and especially Christian behavior, our witness, not just the words we embody, but the witness that we embrace as the people of God.
Thank you, Mama Delk. Then the next question is for you, Reverend K-Ray, and I'm going to merge it with another question that I see that's popped up in the chat. When you say unity, spirit, and faith are the gifts African-American worship offers, are you saying that African-American worship has a stronger faith and spirit than white worship? I would agree that unity is not a gift of whites can boast of, too much intentional and unintentional privilege now being addressed. And I want to merge that, which I think gets to what the question really is what is the theology that emerges from the Afro-Christian experience?
I guess the main thing is this whole idea of being led by spirit and being rooted and grounded from that relationship with God that guides your activities beyond an individual accepting of what you do next. And by putting community at the head of it and putting unity to try to bring people together, particularly when you're in an oppressive society and an oppressive context. And I think that that's the piece that we continue to lift up and continue to be reinforced in. I'm not saying that other communities don't have some of that, but when you've been pressed down and the only place you can go is to your faith community to be reaffirmed as a person, that does something different for you when the society outside your church doors and outside your community does everything it can do to beat you down. And I think that that's the piece that gets reinforced from an Afro-Christian perspective, because when we don't have anything else, we always got God. So and that's the piece that keeps us moving.
Amen.
Could I also say this real quick too, that in the Afro-Christian connection, there was an integration of head, heart, mind, and spirit. Often in Euro, it becomes a very heady exercise. It can become a very heady exercise where we divorce the mind, the body, and the spirit. The fact that in the Afro-Christian tradition, the spirit evolved itself not only in the head, but it was in the mind, it was in the heart, it was in the whole being. It was an expression of faith that gave visual moments of joy and celebration and affirmation and singing and shouting. And folk looking at that at times saw that as too emotional response, where it was very much a holistic response. to the word of God, to the promises of God, to the belief in God. So to worship God with your whole mind, body, and spirit meant to bring your whole self to the table and not just be engaged in an academic exercise. I think there's much we can learn from the tradition from that.
I agree with that. I maybe it's because I'm a child of the South, but I often say that that we worship the God that we need. And I needed as a young person, and most of the Black people that raised me needed a God who was a deliverer, a God who was a savior, a God who showed up in the hard places. And I'm grateful for that tradition. There's one more question here, and then a question that I'm going to read, but I think it's more to me than it is to you all. The first question I want to read is from Richard Crawl. He says, I was in the church in 1957, in seminary from 1965 to 68. Why is this the first I have heard of the Afro-Christian Church being a part of the merger? I was taught that merger in confirmation classes, in church communities, and in adult membership classes. What a difference it would have made if I had known to teach this truth. Why was Afro-Christian Church not included in our early introduction to the UCC? I'm going to let whoever wants to take that, take it. Reverend Brenda, if you're here, can you take that question?
Well,
I'll take it. I'll take
okay,
the question.
me too. Go ahead.
I think when you're trying to force people into an assimilated society, you try to discount some things that doesn't have a large voice. The other thing is that most of what we have done, if we look back, had to do with economic pieces. And so the people who brought money to the table got the biggest voice at the table. And many times we don't want to talk about that piece of it. And I think that is one of the contributing factors. And it may not have been, depending on the exposure where people have been. As I have traveled over this country on behalf of the United Church of Christ, there are a whole lot of places I go into, and they have never even heard of an Afro-Christian tradition. It just got dismissed out of the whole because they put us under the umbrella of the Christian church and kept us there and just mixed it all together and therefore got discounted is one of the things that is my belief anyway.
Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Another thing I believe is what you see depends upon where you've been sitting. And where many of the mothers and fathers of the United Church of Christ were sitting, they were still sitting in Euro settings looking at the world. They weren't sitting within the construct of the Afro-Christian experience and understanding. And when it did, it saw it as an object of its own mission rather than a subject that could inform its mission. And so the way in which you define who you are has a lot to do with who's at the table, who you are, in fact, experience, who comes and who is in the places where decisions are being made and where the church is manifesting itself. And for the most part, after 1957, if you look at all of our settings, it was predominantly white. It was why the United Church of Christ, Ministers for Racial and Social Justice, had to come into existence. It's why United Black Christians came into existence. It's why, in order to begin to move to help this denomination to be the body that it said it wanted to be the inclusive bodies. Many times we wanted to challenge even delegates to synods because they were too predominantly white in the midst of the movement. The question is, did we see in those early moments African Americans as essential to our unity, if African Americans as essential to our understanding of shaping who we would be and who we would become? And I say, for the most part, this denomination was still seeing us as objects, not subjects, a mission to, a mission on behalf of. And when a person is not equal, even I say the American Missionary Association, who wanted to abolish slavery, did not see African Americans as equal to them in the construct of the society that we are part of. And when a person is not equal, don't reach for that history. You don't learn from that history. You don't embrace that as something that can inform and define who you are in ways that you are not free to walk away from.
I can't believe that our time is almost up. There are 3 minutes left. If, with your permission, I'd like to take those 3 minutes and address some things that I think are very important here. Is that okay?
Yes.
The first that I want to address is I've seen floating through the chat people who want to contribute to Franklinton Center.
Yay.
Please know that the contributions that you contribute when you hit the donate link on the webinar go to the annual fund. If you want to contribute to Franklinton Center, I am giving you permission today to not hit that button and go to the Franklinton website and click the donate button there. Someone has already put the Franklinton website in the chat, and I'm going to ask for back of house to list that website again. I am making an exception here. I am saying give to Franklinton Center today. Do not do it by clicking the annual fund button. It's not as easy for me to separate that way. Give it directly to Franklinton Center.
Thank you.
Last question, thank you. Thank you for the work that you all continue to do and the difference that you continue to make. The last question is the UCC prepared to acknowledge this fifth stream in all their historical teachings, documents, and official history? And is there a plan to develop a curriculum to use in history and polity courses? And Mama Delk, you don't know this is coming because I didn't know it was coming, but sometimes the Spirit moves in strange ways. I heard you say that the Afro-Christian history is documented by someone who wrote books before. Who is it?
Yeah, it was documented by Purcell Austin in Hidden Histories, and Reverend J. Taylor Stanley documented it in his history of the Afro-Christian Church as well. And also, I tell you, I was trying to remember not only BBC, but we had just
Rick Taylor
has been also documenting and trying to trace a lot of the Afro-Christian history as well. And he's just done a book on the Christians.
What I would like to suggest is that the United Church of Christ as a denomination from the national setting cannot engage in the racial justice work that we have announced that we are going to engage in without first telling our own truth. And I'm asking if it is possible, if I commit my discretionary funds from this year, that this group would commit to writing that history so that we can publish it as a book titled The Fifth Stream.
Mm.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Obviously, we are not wanting to simply remember the past, but we want to bring the past into the present as an instrument for the directions that God is calling us to do today. And the fifth stream made visible in a book or beginning contribution articles that shape the book will be wonderful. And as you also know, we've been pushing also for perhaps for some support from the Daniel Hand Fund. We have talked about that at one point or another. And as resources under us to help that part, the part of the history that is least documented is the Afro-Christian. Also, the Christian part is least documented in the whole UCC history as well, but especially the Afro-Christian. And we need help in enabling that to come to life. But I love this idea of a book on the fifth stream.
And I'm going to go a little bit further with that. I'm suggesting that we can make that happen as long as someone can do the writing and the documentation. And we can use the sale of this book to begin to fund the other work you're talking about. It won't be all of it, but it would be a good seed for us to start from. If all these people are interested in this history, let us make it available to them in something that we own ourselves, called the fifth stream, or whatever you decide to name it, Mama Delk. You know, you'll call me with a name in the middle of the night.
Right.
But whatever the name is, let's start there as we begin to do this work of moving towards anti-racism. We're never going to be an anti-racist church. No one's heard me say that so far, but anti-racism is a lifelong journey. It is not a destination. We will get closer, but we will always have work to do. I want to thank you, Vivian. You look gorgeous as always, and was brilliant in your presentation. And I'm so glad to see you.
Thank you. So do.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Reverend K. Ray, for your presence here and your brilliance in this conversation. I want to thank Reverend Brenda, who is not with us anymore because she's having internet problems, but for her passion and her brilliance and the work that she's doing to gather all this information before. And of course, I want to thank our wisdom guide, our griot, our sojourner, Mama Yvonne Delk, who always has time to mentor us, to lead us, and to call us back to ourselves. Thank you so much for this time. It won't be the last time that we gather. Thank you all who have attended. Please contribute to the Franklinton Center. Please share the witness of this work that has gone on today and let people know that it will be posted on our website soon. Share it with polity classes, with history classes, with confirmation classes. Let's begin to tell the truth of our past in a new way as we move towards anti-racism as a body. I want to thank Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, who always hosts us with excellence, and back of the house, Jennifer White and Laurel Seiss, who make this possible. I also want to thank Reverend Roberto Ochoa, who is with us as well today as support and as a member of our Quorum Ministries. Thank you. This court recording is available and it will come out to you with your thank you and appreciations. Thank you for your time today and God bless.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.